And joining me on Montana Sportscast podcast today is Stan Ozark. Stan, right in the thick of things with basketball tournaments. We got the districts out of the way. Big divisionals coming up.
Yeah, we here in Eastern Montana, it's interesting because the district tournaments for Class B and C were held this weekend, and for Class B, the Northern B girls will be this weekend in Glasgow, but the Northern B boys will be the following weekend in Shelby. They don't run combined boys and girls, so the girls go starting Thursday. The boys will get an extra week to prepare. And then for Class C, the District 2C and 3C had their tournaments this past weekend. The 2C in Sydney, the 3C in Glasgow. They actually get this week off, and the Eastern C Divisional will start next Wednesday in Wolf Point. So the districts are complete, but not everyone is competing again this weekend. So I thought maybe we'd recap a little bit about what happened over the weekend and what it looks like for those divisional tournaments. We'll start with Class B. In the 1B tournament, which was held in Cutbank, both the boys and girls. The championship was won easily by Fairfield, Fairfield winning 80-43. And the way that the 1B boys played out was pretty much how the regular season conference standings ended up. So Fairfield won the championship, Cutbank finishing second after Fairfield easily won that championship. And then Rocky Boy beat Shelby in the consolation game, 56-50 for the boys. So the boys, Northern B, the teams from the 1B, Fairfield, Cutbank, Rocky Boy, and Shelby, which is, I think, pretty much how everyone thought that would play out. The girls in the 1B is kind of what turned out to be kind of a mess in a sense. And Shelby ended up winning the championship. They came into that tournament with a 5-5 record. They end up winning the championship. Had a huge win over Fairfield in the semifinals. Then they beat Conrad in the championship game, 61-59. So Shelby and Conrad finish 1-2, and then Fairfield wins the consolation 50-30. So they finished third. Shoto and fourth in the 1B girls. And Fairfield, they went 9-1 in conference play, and they end up in third place in the tournament. Cutbank, who finished second in the regular season, they didn't even make it to Saturday night. They got beat out. So they lost Saturday morning, and their season is over. So moving on from the 1B will be Shelby and Conrad, Fairfield, and Shoto for the girls. And again, the girls gets underway this weekend in Glasgow on Thursday. So we'll stick with girls. We'll go to the 2B. No surprise here. The Malta Mets win that championship. They beat Wolf Point 51-29. Their record on the year 17-2 Malta, and the only two losses coming to Class A Haber for Malta. Wolf Point second. The Glasgow Scotties ended up in third. They put away Poplar 61-46. So the Scotty girls, who at one time had just one win about 3/4 of the way through the season, they've actually finished strong, and they end up in third place. That being said, Glasgow played Malta in the semifinals, and Malta won that game by 50 over the Glasgow Scotties. So Malta, Wolf Point, Glasgow, and Poplar will move on to the Northern B. So these are your pairings then for the Northern B girls, which again starts Thursday afternoon. Malta will open up with Shoto. Shoto, the number 4 team from the 2B. And then Glasgow will open up with Conrad. Wolf Point will play Fairfield, and Poplar will take on the champion of the 1B, Shelby. So as you take a look at this, it makes you wonder. And of course, you have to play the games. Shelby ends up winning that championship in the 1B. Malta easily beating Shelby twice during the regular season. If you were just to take a look on paper, it would seem the Malta Mets have a pretty good chance to winning another divisional championship in Glasgow this weekend. As you just wonder about the strength of that 1B. But of course, you have to play the games, and we'll find out right away. Malta and Shoto. And then that Glasgow Conrad game will be a real good indicator. If the Scotties can play Conrad tough and maybe pick up a win, we'll see exactly if the 2B is as strong as maybe I think going into that tournament against the 1B. two teams will advance out of that Northern B divisional tournament this year. They had 3 last year, and the way they rotate things, so just 2 this year. And I'm really excited to find out how this tournament plays out. Obviously, Malta's the favorite, but who's going to be that number 2 team if Malta were to win it? Who would be that second strongest team to come out of that division? Is it going to be a Wolf Point, which finished a strong second, played Malta relatively tough in that championship game on Saturday? We'll just have to wait and see. But we'll be broadcasting that game in Glasgow, so I'm excited for the girls' Northern B. And then the boys' Northern B won't be this weekend. It'll be next weekend in Shelby. And the pairings look like this. Fairfield, who easily won the championship of the 1B, will take on the Glasgow Scotties, who had a 4th place finish. The Scotties were beaten by Poplar in overtime in the consolation game, 56-55. So I want to go back before we get into the Northern B. I kind of got ahead of myself. Let's talk about the 2B boys. And I think I've been talking the last couple of weeks about Wolf Point. They had suffered those 2 losses to Baker and Glendive, and maybe I questioned a little bit Wolf Point going in, how they would match up with some size of some teams, and Wolf Point erased any doubts at that District 2B tournament. They are tough. They ended up winning that championship over Malta, 68-64. And I can't stress how difficult it is to beat any Malta team 3 times in a year. With Dave Costin as the head coach, I revere him quite a bit. He is an excellent coach, but this Wolf Point team really came on strong in the 2B tournament. They opened up with Glasgow. The Scotties jumped out to an early lead. In fact, I think they led at halftime, or maybe Wolf Point had overtaken it at halftime, but then Wolf Point just ran away with that game and defeated Glasgow, and that put Wolf Point in the championship game against Malta, and they end up with a 4-point win. They led virtually throughout that game over Malta. So Coach Hanks and that Wolf Point team, 18-2 on the season, and I think they are feeling pretty good about themselves going into that divisional tournament. Poplar finished in 3rd, Glasgow in 4th. So the boys' Northern B will shape up like this. Fairfield will open up with Glasgow. Cutbank versus Poplar. Rocky Boy will play Malta, and Wolf Point will open up with Shelby. So for Wolf Point, they're going to have Rocky Boy and Malta and Shelby on their side of the bracket. Rocky Boy, a team that Malta has beaten twice this year. Wolf Point's beaten Malta 3 times this year, and Malta's beaten Shelby twice this year. So if it's, as you get into tournaments, it's that's kind of how you compare teams, right? Who played who and who won what game. But I would venture to say the Wolves feel pretty good about themselves, and very strong possibility it would be. Actually, I shouldn't say that's on the same side of the bracket, because that's not how it would be. But Wolf Point will open up with Shelby, and Rocky Boy versus Malta. They'll actually be on other sides of the bracket. I don't have the actual bracket in front of me, but I think Wolf Point, I guess what I'm trying to say, it feels pretty good about themselves going into this tournament, as I'm sure Fairfield does, easily winning the 1B with an 80-43 win over Cutbank in that boys championship game. This is Fairfield, the Eagles, at divisional last year, put on a strong performance. They were a young team. They lost some talent, but always such a strong tradition there. And at this point, I would venture to say Fairfield and Wolf Point probably are the 2 favorites coming out of that Northern B. So and that Northern B boys divisional will be in Shelby again in 2 weeks. So Class B, I think there's some real strong teams there. And at the top, the Malta girls extremely strong. The Wolf Point boys, the Fairfield girls, or Fairfield boys. So those are the teams I would certainly look at in Class B anyway, Bob.
Yeah, it's it's you talk about Wolf Point feeling good, but playing, say if they did come up against Malta for the 4th time this year, it's tough, like you said, to beat somebody 3 times in a row, but it's even tougher that 4th and sometimes 5th time during the season as well. But going to be some great basketball there, and that's I kind of forgot that the divisionals were split between the boys and girls in 2 locations there. I think that might be about the only conference division that's doing that, I believe.
Yeah, and I'm not quite sure. I guess I haven't had that conversation with Activities Director Brenner Flayton why they continue to do that, with the exception maybe that they like having those tournaments at member schools, at member locations. Okay, they
Yeah,
like, and if you were to put a combined tournament together like that, where would you hold that?
yeah,
It would be a huge tournament, and I'm not sure if they know a location. I think they have some huge gyms that would probably be able to hold it. I mean, Cutbank and Shelby are massive gyms,
yes,
and
yeah,
Malta has a nice gym as well. But as far as the communities holding that, and I think they just like having those tournaments in member locations, member school communities. I'm assuming that's the case, but logistics of having a boys and girls combined and where they would play that would certainly be up in there. So, um, as far as
yeah.
Class
No, I
C,
understand that.
yeah, as far as Class C goes, the District 3C tournament was here in Glasgow over the weekend, and we had the District 3C has the two number one ranked teams in the state in Class C, the Luster boys and the North Country girls. And for the North Country girls, no trouble at all in this tournament. They went on to a pretty easy winning that championship, defeating Scobie 58-34. The Luster girls finished third, beating Nashua 47-20. Three teams advance out of the 3C onto the divisional tournament next weekend at Wolf Point. So North Country, Scobie, and Luster will go in as the three teams for the girls. For the boys, Luster came in and they got a first round bye. They pounded Nashua pretty good in the semifinals. Then they ran up against a Scobie team they've beaten a couple times this year, and Luster had to hold on for a 38-37 win. I was laughing about this because I think last week on the show I said if Luster doesn't beat every one of these teams by 20 points, it won't be a successful tournament. And I'm sure that Scobie, if anyone had heard that, was like, okay, well, we'll see what happens. But Scobie definitely had a chance to win that ball game. Luster held on for a 38-37 win. And Coach Jason Wolf of that Scobie Spartan team, what a great tradition, what a great job he's done. And he certainly doesn't have the talent on that team that he had a couple years ago, and which might have been one of the best Class C teams in memory. But very young team, a lot of freshmen and sophomores. I think they have one senior, very young, and he has them play such stifling defense. To hold a Luster team to 38 points is pretty amazing. This Luster team is one that's, averaging 60, 70, 80 points, or getting to 60, 70, 80 points a game, and they were held to just 38. And that one came down to the wire. So I'm sure Coach Randy Reddick of Luster is counting his blessings that they won that. It's an interesting thing with Luster because it's well documented. They've been featured on 406MT Sports, MontanaSports.com. I've all done feature stories on Luster, so everyone's familiar with the team. They have a lot of players not from Luster on that team, and Luster in the 3C and probably in the Eastern C has kind of become the team that you love to hate, right? Because as Randy Reddick addressed in an interview I did with him, and also I think on 406MT Sports or MontanaSports.com, they're not recruiting players. Players are students, I should say, not players, are contacting them and coming to Luster. And he said many of these players haven't played a lot of basketball before. So they take the students and then turn them into basketball players. Now, there's a lot of talent there, but on the outside looking in, it looks like they are recruiting. And I don't think they are. That's my own personal opinion. I don't think they are. They're a private school and they have an advantage over public schools, right? In that players can contact them and come and play for them. So, but Luster, again, kind of the team you love to hate. I think Luster is a great story. I think this is a private Christian school that hasn't had a pile of success in athletics, and they finally put it together. And these kids aren't coming in for 1 year or 2 year. They're 2 years. They're coming in as young kids and they're developing into those basketball players. It'd be one thing if Luster was just recruiting 6 seniors to come in and take them to a state title. And that's not the case. The Hambiras and the Ewing kids have been there, and they've played freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. And Luster folks remember they were one game away from the state tournament last year and lost out at that Eastern C Divisional. But I like the story of Luster, and I am rooting for them. And I was glad to see them. Or I'm glad to see them have that success. We'll see how that transfers over to the Eastern C Divisional. But Luster beats Scobie 38-37. Luster, Scobie, and Nashua will advance on to the Eastern C Divisional for the boys. And then again for the girls, the North Country girls winning easily 58-34. With North Country, and I believe I've addressed this before, for folks who haven't seen North Country play this year, it's not so much about their offense, and they are a very good offensive team. I think people who know basketball will be so impressed with the way this team plays defense. My friend who helps me out with broadcast, Eric Beadle, is a kind of a student of basketball, and he says it's so fun to watch this North Country team. I mean, they're mixing defenses up on the fly. I mean, they're throwing different looks at teams every possession. And that's pretty incredible for a high school team to be able to do that. And they're so not only they have the 6 foot girls and they have some really astute guards who play there as well. Really fun team to watch. And if you get a chance to catch them live or on NFHS, watch their defense, because if they win a state title, it's going to be defensively in the way that they play. So North Country, Scobie, and the Luster girls will advance on to the Eastern C Divisional next weekend in Wolf Point. Over at the 2C, which I talked about last week, what a tournament. It started last Monday and finishes up on this Monday, where they have both the boys and girls game. They finally crowned a champion after 5-6 days of basketball over there in Sydney. The 2C boys was won by Fairview. They beat Freud Medicine Lake in overtime. So Fairview had won the regular season title, and but it takes overtime for them to beat Freud Medicine Lake for the boys. The Fairview team, Charbonneau, Teldy, they are very, very good. What a strong tradition they have as well in Fairview. Freud Medicine Lake has Mason Detman, who's a junior this year. He's been playing since he's been an 8th grader for Freud Medicine Lake, and he is a stud, and not only as a football player, but as a basketball player. And they have some surrounding parts around him, and they've just improved this year. So Freud Medicine Lake could be a sleeper team to watch in that Eastern C Divisional. Bainville finished in 3rd, Savage in 4th, and then since 5 teams go out of the 2C to the divisional, they're actually having a 5th and 6th place game tonight in Culbertson. This is Monday. Culbertson and Plentywood will play for the right to advance on to the Eastern C Divisional. And that bracket is almost impossible to understand unless you understand how they do it. But yeah, so there's a 5th and 6th grade team, 5th and 6th grade, 6th and 5th and 6th place game tonight. Culbertson or Plentywood will advance on as the 5th place team at the Eastern C. And for the 2C girls, no surprise here. Plentywood wins the championship there. Plentywood had a 7-point win over Culbertson for the 2C girls championship. I think most folks are probably assuming we're going to have a Plentywood North Country matchup for the Eastern C Divisional Championship, and certainly both those teams have been playing like champions all season long. North Country and Plentywood will both go into the Eastern C Divisional as a champion. Culbertson finished 2nd, Circle 3rd, Mondack 4th, and Freud Medicine Lake will play Fairview tonight in that 5th and 6th place team. So that 5th place team will advance on to the Eastern C Divisional. And I'm going to pull this up here as the at that Eastern C Divisional tournament, which starts next weekend in Sydney. This is how things will play out. First off, for the girls, now Plentywood will be the number 1 team going in from the 2C. They will play the number 5 team, whoever wins that play-in game, if you will, tonight. So they'll play either Freud Medicine Lake or Fairview. At the top of the bracket, it'll be North Country and Mondack, and then Luster and Culbertson. And at the bottom, Plentywood will play that 5th place team, and then Circle and Scobie at the bottom of the bracket for the girls. For the boys, Luster will open up with Savage. Savage is the number 4 team from the 2C. Nashua, the number 3 team from the 3C, will play Freud Medicine Lake. And then Fairview will play either Culbertson or Plentywood. And at the bottom game of the bracket, a Thursday night game, Bainville and Scobie. The girls' tournament starts Wednesday, the boys' tournament on Thursday, and both tournaments continue through Saturday at in Wolf Point for that Eastern C Divisional. So if you take a look at that, as I mentioned, for the girls, North Country and Plentywood probably would be everyone's pick to meet in the championship game. For the boys, I think it's maybe a little more wide open. Luster, Fairview, Freud, Medicine Lake, I think are three teams that you kind of have to look at. And don't ever count out Scobie. Scobie, again, losing by 1 to Luster. And they'll open up with Bainville, the number 3 team, and out of the 2 seed. And I think Scobie might be favored in that game to get to a semifinal. And you never know what can happen after that. So some exciting stuff happening with basketball. That tournament gets underway next Wednesday in Wolf Point. So they get this week off. A lot of basketball.
I watched the end of the Scobie Luster game.
Yeah.
I was actually in Lockwood, got home, and it was still going on. So I pulled it up, and I saw about the last 2 minutes of it. And I think I probably saw the best part of the whole game.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. That's kind of what I watched as well when we got to San Antonio. So
yeah. Well, Boomer, thanks for coming on and a great report, and looking forward to some great basketball coming up this week at the divisional tournaments, and actually the next 2 weeks, and starting to get a little more interesting all the time.
Yeah, and those divisional tournaments are so much fun. Because so much is on the line, right? I mean, you don't want to lose that Friday night game in the semifinals, because then you have to start relying on someone else to help you out, right? And that's so those Friday night semifinal games at divisional, or probably state as well, are as much fun as you can get, because there is so much on the line for teams and players and coaches. And I'm really looking forward to this Northern B divisional girls to see Malta, and because I again think they would be the favorites to win this, as they are in most of those divisional girls tournaments they go into. They've dominated along with Fairfield that Northern B division for decades. So
yeah, that's for sure. Well, thanks for coming on, Boomer, and safe travels home, and get warmed up before you come home, because I think it's going to get cold.
Yeah, it sounds like we're coming home to some snow, so I'm enjoying the 70-degree temperatures here in the hill country of Texas. So thanks, Bob. I appreciate it.
And I'd like to thank our guests that come on the show and talk about Montana high school sports. Without them, this show would not be possible. And once again, if you like this podcast, please click on the subscribe button below to get alerts when we have up a new podcast. Without them, this show would not be possible. And once again, if you like this podcast, please click on the subscribe button below to get alerts when we have up a new podcast. And I'd like to thank our guests that come on the show and talk about Montana high school sports. Without them, this show would not be possible. And once again, if you like this podcast, please click on the subscribe button below to get alerts when we have up a new podcast.